It's a shocking fall from grace in less than a year. P. Diddy went from beloved music icon to disgraced sexual predator, at least according to the charges from the feds right now. He's behind bars in New York, the same place where just last year he was given a key to the city. It was a disturbing set of led to Diddy's arrest in the way of multiple civil suits brought by accusers. And in some of those suits, co-defendants are listed, and in others, celebrities could. It'd be a time of reckoning for them too. We're taking a deep dive into all the celebrities listed in Diddy's civil lawsuit and whether they too could face federal charges. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. A groundbreaking case brought forth just this week when 54-year-old Shah Diddy Combs was arrested on September 15th. He now faces some pretty serious federal charges: racketeering conspiracy, trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Diddy was indicted by a federal grand jury and is now being held in Brooklyn at the Metropolitan Detention Center after he was twice denied bail. Diddy's attorneys say he was in New York for about a week before the arrest, anticipating the federal indictment. But he wasn't the only one who kind of saw this coming after federal investigators raided two of Diddy's homes back in March. We kind of had an idea. Something was on the way just this week. We learned some of the items that investigators collected during those raids of Diddy's homes in both Miami and Los Angeles. According to the indictment against Diddy, investigators seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants from his homes. The court states that these items were used in something referred to as freak-offs, which were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. According to prosecutors, Diddy and his associates transported commercial sex workers over state lines, and even international. Diddy then allegedly gave these sex workers and victims controlled substances, at times unannounced to the victims. Prosecutors say Diddy did this to keep the victims obedient and compliant. He then took videos of victims having sex with these sex workers, sometimes without their consent. After all this, both Diddy and the victims would receive IV fluids, recover from the physical exertion, and drug use. Federal investigators say that during the raids of Diddy's homes, they collected some of these recordings, showing the disturbing details of these freak-offs, and the feds had a heads up about these recordings, thanks to some of the civil lawsuits filed against Diddy, namely the one brought by Rodney Jones, also known as the producer, Lil Rod. Lil Rod worked with Diddy on his Love album starting in 2022, and says he experienced months of abuse, all at the hands of Diddy. In his lengthy civil suit, Lil Rod refers to these recordings, saying, quote, "required Mr. Jones." That's Lil Rod to record him constantly. Mr. Jones has secured hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings of Mr. Combs, his staff and his guests engaging in some serious legal activity. Lil Rod's lawsuit also lays out some other pretty disturbing claims, like that Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced Lil Rod to have sex with a prostitute. But Lil Rod's lawsuit came out swinging in more ways than one. Not only did it shed light on the dark allegations against Diddy, but it dropped some high-profile celebrity names too. First, there's Academy Award-winning actor Cuba Gooding Jr. Lil Rod alleges Diddy was, quote, grooming him to pass him off to his friends. This fear became reality when Mr. Combs introduced Mr. Jones to Cuba Gooding Jr. While they were on Mr. Combs' yacht. The lawsuit includes pictures of this too, showing both Diddy with Cuba and then Cuba with his arms around him. Lil Rod court docs go on to say, quote, Cuba Gooding Jr. began touching, groping, and fondling Mr. Jones's legs, his upper inner thighs near his groin, and the small of his back near his buttocks and his shoulders. He rejected his advances, and Mr. Gooding Jr. did not stop until Mr. Jones forcibly pushed him away. Here's former prosecutor Melba Pearson. In the last couple of years, there were allegations against him for sexual assault. So now we had those prior allegations, and now we see him tied to this case as allegedly trying to, assault a little or assault others back in 20 on misdemeanor charges of forcible touching and sexual abuse, after allegedly groping a woman in Times Square. By the next year, 3 women had come forward accusing him of non-consensual sexual touching. He eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors that required 6 months of counseling. But in jail time just this summer, he appeared on Dan Abrams Live, where he discussed those charges. When you pleaded guilty to a forcible touching misdemeanor in 2022, eventually led to a guilty plea of a lesser charge. A year later, you settled a federal civil lawsuit. 2 more civil misconduct lawsuits. Can you understand why some would say, don't want to cast this guy? Sure, but I can also understand some people who come up to me in the street all the time and yell, show me the money, and say, hang in there. And I see what you're going through. You make movies for an audience of people, right? So right now, I'm making a movie for faith-based people who are excited to know our hope in humanity, especially the times we're in dealing with politics and the world issues that are going on. So that's where I am now. And have you expressed regret, sorrow, apologies for what happened previously? Everything that happens in my life is for a reason. I believe that, and if I continue to walk on my path, whatever that is, I know at the end result it'll be
and
to
no
make me
longer has a
stronger,
voice
to be a
who
better
will pursue
person,
justice for
to
her
be a better
accusation.
father, and right
As
now,
of the taken against Diddy,
that's the moment.
no
I'm
expansion
in
of the
back to Melba.
investigation,
She
no
says
isolation
it's
orders,
possible that
no
charges
equipment
could be brought
access,
against the actor.
no suspension of attorney
I am
communication.
getting the feeling where
Everything
there's
inside
smoke,
solitary
there's
block
fire,
C continued
right?
as before.
Because now we have
Everything
2 different
except the fear.
instances where you're
If a
accused
female
of the same
warden
type
can
of
vanish
behavior,
after a single note
years
thing
apart.
except the fear.
I
If
think
a
there's
female
something
warden
there,
can
and I don't
vanish
know that
after a
Cooper
single
Guy
note,
Jr. is
ones who
going to
once
escape
worked
from that
overnight
one,
in that area,
because he already
the ones
saw
who filed for
definitely
leave without
people
giving a
moving away
reason,
from him
the ones who
within
saw
Hollywood
but never
circles
spoke.
and other
No one
circles
mentions
once
the
those
note,
first
but
sexual
everyone
assault
knows it
allegations
appeared.
came out.
And if what it
So at
says
this
is
point,
true,
I don't think
then
he's going
punishment.
to get away
Part
with
3.
it. A
The
second
person no
time.
longer in the system. The
It's
internal
possible
personnel
that he could
database
face
of the
charges
Atlanta Federal
based on these
Detention Center
allegations
updated its
that were
weekly
brought
roster.
forward by
Under the
Lil Rod.
category
It is
Special
possible
Personnel
as
Code
well.
Adjustment, the
Again,
name of
we've got
Warden
the
TD was
statute of
marked as
limitations
removed
issue
from
to
system
deal with.
by administrative
So
order.
depending on the
There was
time
no
frame
decision
of when
number
this
recorded.
happened,
It was deactivated.
again, the
Her
Adult
personal
Survivors
contact
Act,
information
which was
disappeared
vehicle
from the
where
internal
many of these
network
lawsuits
exactly
came out when a few
36
civil law
hours
school
after she
suits,
filed her
came
complaint.
out.
The
There
changelog was
was a
executed
thin
from the
amount of
system's
time.
highest access
For
level
those suits
server,
to be
a
filed,
device
the
bearing the
time frame is
identifier
going to be very, very
DCCA1,
important.
located
What
in the
witnesses
coordination
come
office on the
forward,
4th
because
floor
again,
of the Security Administration wing.
This may not be a situation.
Only
where
2
DNA
individuals possess
may
the
be at
authority
play.
to perform a
This may be
system-level
more of a
personnel
situation
removal at
of,
that
hey,
tier,
yes,
the
I was
head
there,
of Federal
and I
Human
recall,
Resources
a
and
Cuba
Detention
Gooding
Center.
Jr., putting
No
his hands
confirmation
on the L-rod,
exists
or
as
I,
was made.
recall
The
certain
removal of
aspects.
Warden TD's
So it's
name
going
was
to
not
be a very
accompanied by any
witness-intensive type
or
of
protective
case.
reassignment.
And the question is, will
At
witnesses be
11:20
willing to
a.m.,
come
a printed
forward?
copy of the
Another
personnel
high-profile
deployment
name
chart was
listed
generated
Lil
in
Rod's
preparation for the
lawsuit
new week's
is Jennifer
schedule.
Lopez.
Under
From
the section marked
standpoint
Internal
of
Alert,
the names
TD's
of the
name
celebrities that were tied to this, the fact that Jennifer Lopez was tied to this back when she was involved in or party to a shooting at a nightclub when she was dating Diddy, and is now alleged to have brought the gun with her to the scene and gave it to Diddy, and that's how the shooting occurred. Lil Rod's team brings up J-Lo when establishing Diddy's history, writing his quote, RICO enterprise has existed for at least dating back to the 1999 nightclub shooting in NYC, when Mr. Combs required his then-girlfriend Jennifer Lopez to transport his illegal firearm into the NYC nightclub. The court also alleged Diddy forced his then-artist Shine to assume responsibility for the shooting of several individuals. Shooting happened on December 27, 1999, at about 2:55 a.m. A fight broke out at a nightclub in New York City between Diddy, Jamal Barrow, who's known as the rapper Shine, and Matthew Allen, who went by the nickname Scar Guns, were drawn and 3 people were shot. No one suffered any life-threatening injuries, and the victims were not involved in the fight. J-Lo and Diddy fled from the scene in a car, but were later arrested and charged. J-Lo's charges were dropped, but the others stuck. Diddy was acquitted, but Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was released in 2009 and deported back to his home country of Belize. Lil Rod alleges it was Diddy who pulled the trigger, and Shine just took the fall for him because of this allegation. Experts, like former FBI agent Bobby Chone, say investigators could take a second look at the shooting if there's a civil lawsuit that lays out this major allegation. What would it take to reopen an investigation into something that happened 25 years ago? Well, it would take it. It would take a different look at it.
First images from the federal raid on Diddy's $40 million
in other
Los
words,
Angeles
he was
estate were
acquitted
released,
on the
no
state
one
murder
expected
charges.
this.
Now federal
Neatly stacked in
charges
display
can be
cabinets like
different.
prized
You have
possessions were
RICO,
200
you can
bottles
have
of
a
baby
continuing
oil.
criminal
Right next to
enterprise,
them,
you can
over
have.
900 bottles of
So
lubricant.
the underlying
Rows and
acts,
rows.
the
It
predicate
looked less like a
acts,
home
if
and
we
more
used
like
to
a
call them
warehouse for something
when I
far
worked
more
RICO
disturbing. These weren't the
cases,
kind of
a
items
RICO
most people
predicate
keep in bulk,
act could
but
be
for
something
investigators,
like
it
that
painted a chilling picture.
1999 case.
Why would one of the most
And you can
powerful men
use
in
it
hip-hop
as a
need this
predicate
much?
act.
And more
You can
importantly,
you can
what
bring
exactly
it up
were they
and,
used for?
when I worked
It
cold
started with a
cases
knock,
of this
then a
type,
battering ram. On a
sometimes
quiet morning in March
with the passage of
2024,
time, people
Homeland
aren't
Security
as
agents
intimidated
stormed Sean Diddy
and they're
Combs'
not
LA
as
mansion
threatened
in the elite
and they get
neighborhood
away
of
from the
Holmby
person
Hills.
who was the
Not
threat.
long after, another
And
team
they
hit his
feel
Miami
more
property on Lake
forthcoming
Lindsay
to
Star
testify
Island.
or
These
to
weren't
give
just casual
statements
searches. These were
in
federal raids with
testimony.
helicopters overhead,
But certainly,
agents in full
I think
tactical
that
gear, and entire
that
blocks on
case
lockdown.
is going to
What were they
be
looking
part of
for?
it.
That question
In the
didn't stay
aftermath
unanswered for
of
long.
that,
Inside
they
the
have
sprawling
witnesses that say he
17,000 square
bragged
foot
about
mansion, agents uncovered a
intimidating
scene that left
witnesses,
even seasoned
paying off
investigators
jurors, certain.
and controlled the
When
sex
you have that
performance
kind of
series,
stuff,
which
if you
he
go back
called
and you find that
payoffs.
juror that was paid off, or
And he
jurors
often
multiple
electronically
that
recorded
may have
them.
been paid off,
A few bottles. We're
certainly
talking
that
hundreds.
gives you
It
the
looked less
impetus
like
to kind of come forward and refresh those charges on a federal case. So the federal cases will be a little different. The charges are a little different. So it's not double jeopardy. And so I think that case that you mentioned, that you cite, I think is certainly one of the ones they're looking to build into a much bigger, to me, maybe a RICO type case. We also know that federal investigators have spoken to other plaintiffs in civil cases against Diddy to learn more about his personality and what he's like in relationships. That means J-Lo is someone the feds will want to talk to if they haven't already. It also means she could be called to testify against him. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. If I was the prosecutor handling that case, I absolutely would list her right. But of course, we need to know whether or not she'd be cooperative. That, of course, changes the strategy when it comes to trial. So you may list someone as a potential witness. That does not mean you're necessarily going to call them. The question is whether or not they're going to testimony is really going to help you. But there is a universe where she could testify against him in terms of, violence, in terms of his interactions with other artists, especially the folks that have been coming forward alleging that he has harmed them in some way or engaged in human trafficking and sex trafficking. So was she aware of any of that going on? Did she see him with underage girls, or was she present for when some of those videos were taken? That little rod included screenshots of those videos in his pleadings. So how much of that did she know? When did she know it? And what actions did she take at the time? Is that part of the reason why they broke up? We don't know. So all of this will to be seen. Obviously, the prosecution and law enforcement need to speak with her, get a statement from her to understand what she knows or what she could be able to testify to, and then make appropriate decisions from there. But it's not just artists that Lil Rod named either. He specifically mentioned Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in talks. It reads, in part, quote, Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties, affiliation with and/or sponsorship. Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garner legitimacy and access to celebrities, such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries, like British Royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything. But why bring him up then? It may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically, he being Diddy, was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening.
And just because you were at a party doesn't mean you know what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the part is being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings. So it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that came out in connection with the Axine case, that they were close and that they traveled together. And, you know, there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage. That would be a different story. But Prince Harry, and the way that it was mentioned, seemed to be very, again, just sort of trying to bring legitimacy and talk about these were the people that Diddy, he surrounded himself by to protect himself. Prince Harry has no criminal charges or even any accusations of illegal activity, but he could still see the inside of a courtroom in a defamation case. It's possible that Prince Harry may be able to preserve his reputation, and since it was such a minuscule mention in the greater context of this filing, he may be okay. Another celebrity mentioned in Lil Rod's lawsuit is Young Miami, who dated Diddy from the lawsuit. Young Miami's cousin assaulted Lil Rod during the Thanksgiving holiday in 2020. Similar to Prince Harry, there are no allegations against Young Miami herself. So there's probably no worry of charges being filed against her, but there could be charges against some of the other people listed in Lil Rod's lawsuit. That's people like Diddy's chief of staff, Christina Coram, who Lil Rod compares to Ghislaine Maxwell, the longtime companion of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein died by suicide in 2019 when he faced numerous charges of sexual assault over the course of multiple years. Maxwell was charged and found guilty of sex trafficking in relation to her time with Epstein, and she is currently serving a lengthy prison sentence. Lil Rod says Christina Coram ordered sex workers and prostitutes for Mr. Combs and ordered and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, and mushrooms to Mr. Combs and his celebrity guests who were present on his rented yacht and his homes in Miami. This is referenced in Diddy's indictment too, saying members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including high-ranking supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees, facilitated the freak-offs by, among other things, booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies,
and no longer has a voice who
controlled
will pursue
substances,
justice for her
baby oil,
accusation.
lubricant, extra
As of the
linens,
taken against
and
Diddy,
lighting. Federal
no expansion of the
prosecutors
investigation,
also alleged
no
these
isolation
associates
orders,
arranged
no
travel
equipment
for
access,
victims, and
no
commercial
suspension
sex
of attorney
workers
communication.
delivered large sums
Everything
of cash
inside
to Diddy
solitary
to pay
block
these
C
sex
continued
workers,
as before.
and even scheduled
Everything
the
except
delivery
the fear.
of IV fluid.
If a female
So,
warden
according
can
to
vanish
Melba,
after a
it's
single
possible
nothing except
some of
the
these
fear.
associates
If a
are
female
charged
warden
too.
can
None of
vanish
these
after a
cases,
single
when
note,
you have
ones who
these
once worked
high-profile
overnight
people
in that
that
area,
have been using
the ones who
people
filed
over
for leave
years,
without
these
giving a
cases
reason,
happen
the ones who
without a
saw but
Kelly
never
had a
spoke.
handler.
No one mentions the note, but everyone knows it appeared. And if what it says is true, then punishment. Part 3. The person no longer in the system. The internal personnel database of the Atlanta Federal Detention Center updated its weekly roster. Under the category Special Personnel Code Adjustment, the name of Warden TD was marked as removed from system by administrative order. There was no decision number recorded, but was deactivated. Her personal contact information disappeared from the internal network exactly 36 hours after she filed her complaint. The changelog was executed from the system's highest access level server, a device bearing the identifier DCCA1, located in the coordination office on the 4th floor of the Security Administration Wing. Only 2 individuals possess the authority to perform a system-level personnel removal at that tier, the head of Federal Human Resources and the Detention Center. No confirmation exists as the patient was made. The removal of Warden TD's name was not accompanied by any or protective reassignment. At 11:20 a.m., a printed copy of the personnel deployment chart was generated in preparation for the new week's schedule. Under the section marked Internal Alert, TD's name
of limitation didn't matter. Cassie's lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but it was still made public, dropping a laundry list of bombshells about Diddy that the public hadn't previously heard. Cassie's lawsuit outlined years of abuse by Diddy, starting she was just 19 years old, and at the time, he was 37. According to her suit, Diddy was prone to uncontrollable rage and frequently beat Cassie savagely. Cassie alleged Diddy forced her to use drugs and would physically beat her or force her to have sex with prostitutes. Then there's the allegation that on at least 2 occasions, Diddy demanded Cassie hold his gun in her purse. The lawsuit goes on to state, quote, "There was no clear reason why Mr. Combs required her to hold his guns, except to reinforce to his young girlfriend that he was violent, powerful, and dangerous." This echoes a similar allegation made by Lil Rod about Jennifer Lopez's part in the 1999 New York nightclub shooting. Not only did Jennifer Lopez allegedly bring the gun to the club, now we're also looking at years later, Cassie coming forward and saying that Diddy forced her to carry a gun with her when they went to different events. So again, I think that this is more along the lines of when you look at this from a domestic violence lens, from the standpoint of the abuser being very controlling and demanding certain activities to prove loyalty to, basically put yourself in a bad situation where only he can be the one to save you, basically. So in seeing that, the parallels between J-Lo's experience and Cassie's experience. Number 1, it brings more credibility to what Cassie said in her pleadings, but also, again, it causes us to look at Jennifer Lopez and be like, some of the comments she made about the end of her relationship to Diddy in terms of, well, there was infidelity, and, she kind of skirted the issue a bit, but when you start to look back at her comments, you start to think, oh, were you in a domestic violence relationship with Diddy, much like how Cassie ended up in a domestic violence relationship with him. Cassie kind of broke the floodgate, so to speak, when she made her civil suit back in November. These crazy allegations, we'd never heard anything like it before. And then, all of a sudden, we have several more people coming forward, and then more when it turns to 2024. So we have multiple plaintiffs who are coming forward, alleging very similar things. I'm wondering, without these civil suits, would we even be here right now? Would Diddy even have been arrested and indicted? I really don't think so. I really don't think so, because Cassie's lawsuit opened the floodgates, and I think it empowered other survivors to come forward and tell their story. And when Little Rod came forward, I think that was just another huge, just a huge moment in this case, because now you have male victims coming forward, and we know statistically male victims of sexual assault generally don't report for a number of reasons, but they many times view it as an attack on their masculinity, and they're very concerned about how they would be viewed publicly. And Little Rod was brave, which I really commend his bravery in standing up and saying, listen, this what happened to me, and that empowered more and more folks to come forward, including most recently Danity K, one of the members of Danity Kane, stating that he had abused her, and she had witnessed the abuse he had levied on others. So I think that all of these voices coming forward and saying, listen, there's something here. The feds took notice, and even though they may not have been public about it at first, we knew, obviously, when they searched the houses, we knew that this was getting very serious, but they were monitoring this the minute that Cassie filed her lawsuit, and they read those allegations. I can assure you that investigation started immediately, and then as more and more survivors came forward, again, the feds would be going and interviewing each of those people, seeing what evidence they have. So for instance, do they have maybe some cell phone footage? Can they substantiate what occurred to them in other ways? Maybe follow-up text messages, emails. All of these things are aspects that the Kane are able to use to now bring in their case in chief against P. Months ago, we reported that Cassie was working with federal investigators in the case against Diddy. Can't know for sure whether she testified in the grand jury hearing that would ultimately indict Diddy, but it's likely at least some of his accusers did. I do believe that a number of the survivors would have testified. I don't think that they would have brought all of them because of the fact that, number one, you want to testifying is traumatizing, especially when you're talking about the most awful day likely of your life and some very degrading things that happened to you, and you have to tell that to a bunch of people you don't know, so you have to be very cautious in when and how bring your victims and your survivors to testify, and think about that in terms of your strategy, because, again, you may want to save some of the survivors for the actual trial if this does go to trial, and maybe just pick one or two that make the point, right? And then you can fill it in with more evidence as the trial proceeds, but you don't necessarily have to show all of your evidence to the grand jury. You just pick the strongest pieces of evidence so that, again, you're not burning your survivors out before they get to the point of trial unnecessarily. Obviously, they do have to testify and, tell their story so that the jury has something to liberate on. But at the same token, you don't want to push them too much because, again, that trauma is very real. And even if they are getting assistance through counseling or something along those lines, still a lot to have to talk about it, especially in with the huge media frenzy around it. And so many people weighing in, and whether it be social media or other celebrities or things like that. So those are some of the things to think the assistant U.S. attorney would have been considering when deciding who should be brought in front of the grand jury to testify. And when it comes time for trial, we could expect to hear from Cassie or other accusers in federal court. You're bringing up a really good point because, as you said, this is probably one of the darkest times of the survivors' lives, and they have to come forward with these serious allegations and relive the trauma that I'm sure they've been working to overcome. It's really tough, but we're assuming that a lot of them are going to testify at the trial, whenever that may be, and there are several accusers that to go through and do all of that. What would it look like at the trial then? At the trial now, the key is the casting. The U.S. Attorney's Office has to make sure that they're not going too far afield with bad character evidence. We saw how that kind of backfired in the Harvey Weinstein case, as well as a Bill Cosby case, where other instances were brought in that were maybe not as close in time, or more so, not really enlightening the jury about what happened in the charges that were in the indictment, but more so he's just a really bad, horrible, predatory person. That may be the truth. However, when it comes to proving the charges at hand, you have to be very focused on making sure the jury understands what happened during the time frames that are specified in the indictment. And so if some of these other survivors, let's say something happened 10 years ago, that might be too far in time for them to be able to testify. But if we're talking about an instance of something that happened last year, for instance, that might be closer in time to allow them to be able to testify. And again, if they have specific knowledge about certain aspects of the indictment, of course they'll be brought to testify. Again, you have to be very cautious because you want to be able to preserve, if you're able to get a conviction, you want to be able to preserve it on appeal by not making these types of errors. After his indictment this week, Diddy pleaded not guilty to all charges and was denied bond twice. Statement from his legal team reads, quote, "Shah Diddy is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who has spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal." To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with this investigation, and he voluntarily relocated to New York last week in anticipation of these charges. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. More updates are sure to come in the case
Present,
of United States
and no longer has a
versus
voice who will
Diddy.
pursue
So
justice
make sure
for her
to subscribe
accusation.
to our YouTube page
As of the
so
taken
you don't
against
miss
Diddy,
a thing.
no
Reporting
expansion of
for
the
Law&Crime,
investigation,
I'm
no
Sierra
isolation orders,